Our last case is State versus Yerra. You each will have 15 minutes to present your arguments, and the appellant may reserve up to 5 minutes. You may proceed.
May it please the court, Attorney Allison Hibbert on behalf of appellant Kishore Yerra. I'll reserve 3 minutes for rebuttal. So this case turns on whether Mr. Yerra's convictions for importuning are against the manifest weight of the evidence in light of the conflicting testimony regarding the internet conversations that he engaged in. Over a span of months, he used an internet chat room to talk to who he believed was someone trolling him. And when I say trolling, I mean just engaging in almost role play, trying to get the other person to admit who they truly were, and he himself was not being honest about who he was or what he was doing there. It was more of a game for him, like, you know, I don't believe what you're saying, I think, and he said he always believed that it was an older male, somebody not who they said they were, and somebody who was just similarly goofing around and wasting time on the internet. And the things that he said were definitely disgusting and bizarre, but they didn't necessarily start off that way. They started off very normal, and as things progressed and as he found out things from the other person, he thought to himself, you know, this is not who they say that they are, I can tell. And so he asked for pictures. The pictures didn't look like someone who was actually 13 years old. One of the photos had, it was a dated photo, and the woman in it had a wedding ring on. So, you know, that was an alert to him that this probably wasn't, you know, somebody telling the truth. And so a normal person would just back away from it and say, this is stupid, this is a waste of my time. But he
Maybe a cop.
I'm sorry.
This may be a police officer.
You know, he's extremely naive, and he really didn't think that, because I think if he thought that, he would have backed down and been like, oh, this is not something I want to be involved in. And that's the thing, is that this case turns on his subjective belief. And the standard is that he believes that the person he's talking to is 13 to 15 years old, or that he's reckless with regard to that fact. And he never believed that it was a 13-year-old girl.
I guess maybe one of the problems I have with that is, can't everybody say that? Oh, I just went ahead and then when they find out that it's a police officer, well, I never believed it was really a 13-year-old girl.
Absolutely, and I'm sure everybody does say that. But oftentimes there are other indications other than the conversations themselves, like the person gives their real phone number and engages in a phone call with the person on the other end, or they make arrangements to meet, which happened in this case, but they actually show up, and maybe they have condoms in their pocket or something like that. In this case, it was solely these internet conversations, and Mr. Yerra never provided any truthful information other than that he lived, I think he said he lived in Akron, which is true, he lived outside of Akron, but aside from that, he never said anything truthful. He made up the car he drove, he made up his age, he might have given his, or close to his real age. He made up a name, he made up a story, to him it was just, I have nothing to do at work, I'm gonna sit here and, you know, try to get this person to admit what they're really doing. And it's true that everybody would say, oh, I never actually thought that it was a young girl, but in Mr. Yerra's case, unfortunately, you know, he really did never think that. He maintained throughout that he thought it was an older male. And the thing is, ultimately he was right. It was an older male on the other end of that internet conversation. So it's really not such a stretch to think that he thought he was talking to an older male when in fact he was speaking to an older male. Once it progressed to the point of let's actually meet, that's when he was like, okay, well now this is weird, I'm out of here, like it's gone too far. But he never intended to meet this person. He's, you know, if he had any inclination that it was a police officer or it was something real, anything real, he would have backed away from it. And the thing is, by punishing him for engaging in, trickery on the internet is really not what the statute's intended to cover. The statute is meant to root out people who think that they're actually speaking with someone who could be 13 years old and somebody, soliciting a 13-year-old. And never at any time did Mr. Yerra think that he was soliciting a 13-year-old. He never believed it was a 13-year-old. And then I guess, the other side of it could be, well, he was reckless with regard to the fact that it may be a 13-year-old. But he did not think that it was ever likely that those circumstances, the circumstance being that it was a 13-year-old girl, existed. He just thought that that was so unlikely that it was just not what was going on. So to him, he wasn't even ignoring a risk. He was just his mindset was, this is not a 13-year-old girl, and I wonder what they're really up to. And it's nothing that, a normal person really would ever do, waste their time on the internet, catfishing someone. There's also catfishing someone. That's not normal. That's very odd. But that's what he did. But what he didn't do was believe that he was soliciting a 13-year-old or even believe that he was speaking with a 13-year-old girl.
So you're not really contesting that he solicited this person?
No, I think that he said disgusting things. He did in fact say disgusting, repulsive things, and he intentionally said disgusting, repulsive things in soliciting the other person's chat mate. As time went on, he would say even more repulsive things to try to get this person to say, okay, listen, I'm out of here, this is weird, you're being weird, I'm not actually 13, this is too much. But the person never said that. The person continued on with this because what it was one person on one end trying to get a conviction out of this, and Mr. Yerra on the other end, unknowingly trying to get the person to admit that they weren't who they said that they were. So you have two people who are going back and forth, and they each have a common goal in mind, but trying to lure the other person farther in. But at no point did Mr. Yerra actually think that it was a 13-year-old. And meanwhile, Detective Lockman, the chat mate who was posing as Lisa, the 13-year-old, continued and played along with it, trying to get the conviction. So they both dug their holes even deeper in trying to get the other person to further their purpose. The things that Mr. Yerra said just were so far out there, as it went on, because he couldn't, himself imagine why this person was playing along with this still. To him, it was just a game, and he's like, the other person just continues to maintain that they're, this 13-year-old girl. And there were so many clues to Mr. Yerra that the other person was not a 13-year-old girl. As he testified that they said that they got in trouble smoking and drinking. And, to him, he's naive and, he's a very innocent guy. And to him, he thought, there's no way that a 13-year-old would be involved in smoking and drinking. Those are things that 13-year-olds don't do. The 13-year-old said that their mom was unemployed and was always out looking for a job. He was thinking, if you're unemployed, you're not out all the time. She seemed to be always away from the house. Meanwhile, there were specific time slots that the person he was talking to would log on to the internet. He thought that was weird. If she's just using this time that she supposedly has while her mom runs out, it wouldn't be these large time slots that were so regular. So he never thought, oh wow, this is 13, this might really be a 13-year-old girl. Never thought it, and never even thought that.
It doesn't seem like you're describing a naive person though, because he realizes that he starts adding it all up and everything, so it doesn't sound like somebody that's naive.
Well, naive to the criminal activities that people would engage in. He just didn't think that it was possible that, you know, this supposed young girl was getting in trouble for smoking and drinking, or would actually be a 13-year-old in this 18-year-old and over chat room trying to talk to him all the time. He didn't even think that that was possible. He went in this chat room fairly regularly, I think, and for doing so, nothing was ever found on his computer, anything like that indicating he was into young girls, nothing. Everything was searched, his phones, his computers, his work computer, his home computer, and nothing like that ever came to light. He just, you know, he was stupid, but what he did was not the criminal behavior that the statute was meant for. He only wanted the other person to admit, you know, okay, you're right, you got me, like, this is not, I'm not really 13 years old, I'm not really 13-year-old Lisa Haynes.
Did you want to save some time?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
May it please the court, Mary Solanska on behalf of the County of the State of Ohio. I would submit to the court that State's Exhibit 1, which was admitted into evidence, and I quoted or paraphrased portions of that in my brief, and hopefully the court is able to see. I put the counter numbers also where that was, and the page numbers from the written transcript of the chat. The trial court poured over those transcripts and found many instances where what the defendant was saying was consistent with him either believing that this was a 13-year-old girl or certainly that he was reckless in that regard. One of the things that counsel brought up was that Judge Carr, she'd mentioned at first that he was, her client was naive, and you pointed out perhaps some of that didn't necessarily sound naive. And I just wanted to point out that the defendant actually said, and I didn't write down the transcript page, but it is in my brief, that if only she were a little older, he said he wished that the age difference would go away. He went on to say, it isn't right, it's not good or decent. And then he said, and I have this in quotes, I will be behind bars, but so far I haven't acted inappropriate. I guess meaning carrying out the sexual activities that he was soliciting from this officer posing as a 13-year-old girl. I think that that's very telling, and it certainly isn't someone that's naive to the criminal system. He knew that it's inappropriate to have any kind of a sexual relationship with a 13-year-old child. So I would respectfully disagree with counsel on that point. The trial court noted that in the many instances with the court, and I cited even a few more, the defendant asked this young lady if she was familiar with a razor, and this was specifically in the context of talking about her panties and then asking whether she was familiar with a razor. And I think that goes to the mindset. And when you look at this doesn't appear to be a role playing. And even the defendant I think there was a reference to, he asked if this was a police officer. It's because there may be some concern out there, but the heedless indifference comes in when there's concern, but I'm just going to go right ahead and you know, I'm acting like this is a 13-year-old girl, and I'm kind of setting those concerns aside because I want to engage in this behavior and I want this to be someone that's younger. And I think that the record just bears that out overwhelmingly. The defendant, when there was a comment about her smoking and drinking and curfew, when he asked what kind of trouble she'd gotten into, the defendant said, smoking and drinking at 13, and there's 3 exclamation points from the chat, and he says, you have a lot of growing up to do. You are a cute kid, by the way. So he you know, that context of he can't believe that somebody that age would do that is belied by his own statements following, you know, the question of finding out this is what the 13-year-old, alleged 13-year-old is telling him, or she gets in trouble for. Because he then says, oh, you have a lot of growing up to do, which is, to me, supports the conclusion that this defendant either believed that she was 13 or he acted with heedless indifference to whether she was 14. And I think that the fact that he even, that they even talk about meeting and that they make this arrangement, whether he backs out or not, that could have been just fear because, as his statement, he knows if he acts inappropriately, he'll be behind bars. And so in his mind, the line is, if I have sex with her. Well, if he really believed that this was an adult male posing as a 13-year-old girl, then he wouldn't be worried about getting in trouble for having sex with that person. It's because he believes she's 13, which is what she told him. And Detective Lottman said, within the first line, the first response to this chat, he says, this is, I'm Lisa Haynes and I'm 13 years old, and it's a getting to know you conversation that then escalates. So there's, the officer is certainly saying, I'm a 13-year-old girl. And as far as the question of whether this is just role-playing or seeing how far someone's going to go, I addressed that. There was a case, State versus Weir, from the 2nd District, Montgomery County, in which the court had a similar situation. A law enforcement officer posing as a 15-year-old had online communications, which the defendant testified in that case and described as merely phone play, kind of a role-playing situation. And what the 2nd District court held was that phone play, if that's what it is, can involve solicitations prohibited under 2907.072, which is the section that specifically refers to a law enforcement officer posing as a child between 13 and 16 on the internet. This was a gentleman who was 35 years old. The fact that he may believe that people didn't give their real information online also doesn't support the conclusion that he believed that this was an adult that he was talking to, or an adult male. I think that the record, when you look at it, is just so replete with instances that support that he did in fact believe this. In fact, at one point he said to her, sometimes he felt as if she was an adult because of the way she talked, but then he referred to Lisa as his 13-year-old baby. So right after that, so he's saying, sometimes it feels like you're an adult. And that may have been the aspect of, you're having these mature conversations talking about sex, so I guess I feel like you're an adult, but you're my 13-year-old baby, And also, there's many instances in the record where the defendant talks about having a daddy-daughter relationship or daddy-baby relationship with her, that they could go away together somewhere and he could be the daddy in public, and then she could be his little, she could be daddy's girl in public, and then she could be daddy's little whore in private. And if she had a baby or got pregnant, then they could say that it was just her newborn baby brother. And none of that supports a conclusion that this man did not believe that he was talking to a 13-year-old girl. Everything points to the fact that he was. And even if this is a role-playing situation, he was reckless as to whether she was a 13-year-old girl. Just because somebody may have given some false information, people may be prone to giving false information on chat rooms, the news is replete with instances where children do go and meet with these adults and run off, and situations happen. And so that have met on chat rooms. For the defendant to say, I didn't believe that she was 13, and he say I was reckless in that regard. He even made a plan to meet with her, but then he got cold feet. So I just think that there are so many instances in the record within the chat conversations, the defendant's own words, because he took the stand and he said, yes, that was me, I had those chats. So his own words support the conclusion that he certainly knew, and if not knew, he was at least he's reckless, that he acted with heedless indifference, that this person may have been 13 years old and, female 13 to 16 years old. I think that this is not the case where the evidence, let me rephrase, under State versus Otten, this is not a manifest injustice in this case. There's overwhelming evidence. And I use that word sparingly, but I think in this case, the 70-odd pages of transcript contain so many instances where the defendant is talking about the sexual acts that he wants to do with this person and referring to her age and talking about the downfalls and pitfalls of her age and the difference in age and wishing that there wasn't a difference of age, all supporting the conclusion that Mr. Yerra knew or was reckless that the person he was communicating with on the computer over Yahoo Messenger was in fact a 13 to 16-year-old child. If there are no questions?
Evidently no.
Thank you.
So I would agree that there is overwhelming evidence that Mr. Yerra sat behind his computer and solicited someone who was pretending to be 13. But where it falls short is that he did not believe that that person was 13 years old, and he did not even think it was likely that they were 13 years old.
Well, the prosecutor raised a good point when she says at the very least he was reckless because he has no idea. So what if it was a 10-year-old? I mean, he has no idea. That's the whole point, isn't it? Isn't that reckless just to say, well, I don't think so, so therefore I'm not reliable for it, I'm not responsible. I can just make these sexual comments and solicit anybody I want to because in my mind I think they're not a 13-year-old.
Right, but they in fact were not a 13-year-old. So
How did he know that?
Because of the clues that they were giving him. And as it turns out, he was right. It was an older male. So, and it wouldn't have been wrong had it, for example, this statute would not have covered his conduct had the older male pretending to be a 13-year-old that he was talking to not been a detective. So it would have just been your average people on the internet goofing around. And it's disgusting, the things that he said. It truly is disgusting. But he never actually thought that the situation was that he was speaking to a 13-year-old. He knew, and he was right, that it was someone older, probably a male, pretending to be a 13-year-old. Where he went wrong is that it turned out to be a detective. But had it not been a detective, this conduct would have been, perfectly acceptable. Not normal, very bizarre, but not criminal.
Well, I'm not sure I understand your point. It wouldn't have been wrong if it hadn't been a detective. If the statute talks in terms of reckless, if you don't have a clue who you're talking with and somebody says they're 13, how is that not reckless to keep having a sexual conversation and invite them to have sex with you?
Because he did not think that those circumstances were likely to exist.
But, okay, all right.
So to him, it was just not even an option that that was somebody who was 13. He was certain that he was just talking to somebody trolling him on the internet. He never thought, like, maybe that it really was a 13-year-old. And had he actually thought that, he knew it was inappropriate to have a sexual relationship with someone who was underage. And he wouldn't have continued it if he actually thought that. And that's the thing, he didn't think that. He thought it was an older male tricking him, and he was indeed right. It was an older male tricking him. And if two adults were to get on the internet later today, and one were to pretend to be a 10-year-old, and one gave their real information that they were 35 years old, the statute would not cover that. It doesn't cover adults pretending to be somebody else on the internet. And it's a real thing, these age fetishes, that people pretend the daddy-daughter situation. It's not something you or I would ever do, but people do it. It's their thing. And I don't even think that this was that, though, but that's the, that's a good analogy here, is that, people pretend to be people that they're not on the internet. And that's what both of these people did. And had it not been for the fact that it was a detective, this would have been perfectly legal, because he did not believe that it was a 13-year-old, did not think it was possible it was actually a 13-year-old, so he continued on, because that would not be criminal behavior. Thank you.
The court will take the matter under advisement and issue a written opinion. It will be sent to both sides and we'll also release it electronically. Thank you so much.